2, 1. Welcome everyone, Magnus here. I was like having problems trying to connect, making sure that this thing was working. YouTube's interface is like still new to me, so I'm trying to recognize their streams. And I've been streaming a lot on Twitch lately, which is, I'm getting used to that interface, but the new YouTube interface is funny. But any more of that is not a problem. Welcome. Today we're doing the MagnusCamera Awards. This is the first year that I'm doing this. Now the theme of this will be basically the best DSLR and mirrorless cameras for video-centric purposes, but the awards will go to anything that was either released or at the very least announced in 2020. So I've got a handful of categories and the reasons why I chose them. Now this is my list. This is not some list that was provided by someone else. This is basically based on either what I've used, experienced, or read about, or got excited about in 2020. So we've got a couple of categories that we're going to talk about, and we're going to go from there. So to hit things off on the very first annual MagnusCamera Awards, we're going to hit it aggressive, we're going to hit it hard, and we're going for let's go for the most exciting camera of 2020. You can see that little hard to see label above my head, but most exciting camera of 2020. Now what this category means to me is basically it's the camera that was the most hyped and most like searched, the most frantically wanting to get as much information as soon as possible, and that's in my own perspective. Basically it had the most excitement around it before release, and of course even after release a lot of people still talking about it, and that's pretty much what I'm trying to go with this first category. Is like, what camera caused that excitement? Now this was a banner year for a lot of cameras, and the two that come to mind are the A7S III and the R5 and R6. Actually, those cameras had really the most talk, especially because they were advertised on their video specs, and video specs took the forefront for a lot of those cameras. But there was a lot of excitement built around all of that. Now now obviously there were other cameras that came out. You had the ZV-1, which was Sony's like portable kind of vlogging camera. You had the M50 Mark II that was released or announced and released later that year, but none of them really created a lot of buzz. Even Panasonic came out with with their own camera announcement, but the one that created the most buzz, or by far the most buzz, was none other than the R5 and the R6 together. Now these two cameras from Canon were a lot of buzz to happen in late 2019, but in early 2020 the specs were unbelievable, and there was so much talk as to whether you should even believe Canon would possibly have those cameras with those specs. Now they're tied, R5 and R6, because both were just unbelievable for their price points and the fact that Canon would actually release cameras with 4K 120 frames per second, 8K raw video, 8K video, and on the R6 you had 60 frames per second, full frame 4K, and full frame 4K for the first time in Canon's lineup. It was just so exciting that if you look up what were the top searched cameras for the camera industry, it was really the R5 and then R6. So that's the first award. Moving on to the next category. Let me turn off these labels that I got here. So next category is actually similar, but it's the most anticipated camera of 2020. Now obviously contenders here, you once again have the R5 and R6, and to be honest, it is the A7S III as well as one of the most anticipated cameras because of their featured specs and about how long people had to wait for those cameras before they were actually released. Now you can say that Canon's library of higher end 4K cameras was waited for a long time. I mean, when the 5D Mark IV came out in 2016, people wanted full frame 4K, and we got a crop 4K. And then every other camera released by Canon that had 4K always dealt with a crop. So we waited for a full frame crop for a long time. But this award, I have to give it to the Sony a7 III. Sony actually had a great lineup of cameras that were coming out, and they were all releasing relatively around the same time. The Sony AR Mark II, Sony A7S Mark II, so Sony A7 II, they were all coming out at the same time. Then you had the Sony A7 III come out. You had the Sony A7R III come out. And then you had the A9 series come out too. But then you had Sony going to the A7 IV. But where's the A7S III? You're already on A7 IV. You had two A7R cameras come out, but you didn't have an A7 III. Is A7S III. And for years, I mean, I think I made a video 2 years ago talking about what the A7S III might possibly have. So then finally, Sony announces the A7S Mark III after the R5. So the anticipation after the R5 was announced was like, oh my gosh, what's Sony gonna do? What's Sony gonna do? Because everyone expected it to be announced this year. So again, building more anticipation. And then finally, the Sony A7S III gets announced, and that camera like pretty much took all the attention off the R5. I knew from people who were commenting on this channel saying, you know what? I'm canceling my R5 order because of that overheat. And A7S III just has it right for me from a video perspective. So kudos to Sony for pulling off a great year with the most anticipated camera in a long time. All right, so let me mark those labels off. Most anticipated camera. And now the next series, and I'm looking at like a screen that I have all the categories here, is I think this is important for me because the camera business is difficult, and to stay relevant is difficult because there's a lot of competition, but the camera industry itself has been on the decline and is on the decline for a long time. But Camera Company of the Year, what this means to me is that a camera company did the right moves and made the right plays in 2020 with releases, with their marketing strategy, everything, in order to get it just right. Now, in this, you have contenders Panasonic, you have Fuji, you have Sony, of course, Canon. Now, of course, Fuji released their wonderful X-T4, which is a great camera. That XT series is great for the APS-C lineup. Olympus is not in this category because they basically, you can almost say after they sold their camera division, they're pretty much bowing out of the camera industry, in my opinion. Panasonic with their S5, which to me is almost like a GH5. You had Sony making moves and you had Canon making moves, of course. And they seem to be Sony and Canon really were the breakout stars of 2020, which was an exciting year for cameras. But the one camera company that actually was really the king of making the right moves in 2020, I have to give it to, personally, again, these are my awards, so my opinion, it's definitely Sony. Sony did it. Sony knew that the A7S III, for example, was the perfect camera to be announced, and they almost like strategically picked announcing it after Canon so they could make the right move and come out with the camera that would be in perfect direct competition with Canon, but then up it because saying, you know what, we do 4K 122, but we don't overheat. We've got a better improved menu system. We've got easy to edit codecs in the camera. Enjoy, all you camera lovers, for video. Where Canon failed with that marketing strategy, Sony got it right. And then when Canon, and although this is a DSLR mirrorless like hybrid cameras, it's still cameras. When Canon was like, oh yeah, we've got the Canon C70, which also does 4K 120 with a crop sensor. It's a cinema camera, it's a crop sensor, but they're like, hey, you could buy this speed booster, get close to full frame. Sony was like, okay, we've got the FX6. That's full frame. It's got great low light performance, and it's basically like a real cinema style A7S3. That in itself is incredible. Sony pulled the right moves, and then they catered to their different markets with the vlogging market with the ZV-1, and then of course the surprise A7C, which is like a mini A7 Mark III, which is like Sony just knew what they were doing and came out with a good strategy to just release those cameras. That's why Sony gets Camera Company of the Year. Moving on. Next award we've got is Best Camera Under $2,000. Now this in itself is an important category. Now this Best Camera Under $2,000, in my opinion, is best camera for video, because this is what we're talking about here, video-centric cameras. Now there's obviously different price points for different cameras, but if you're looking for something to at least get started with video, and you've got some money in your pocket, because obviously up to $2,000 still is not inexpensive. When it comes to specs, when it comes to just being able to shoot really good production level stuff from the cameras of 2020, because in previous years you can still find great used prices and great cameras that were released in previous years. But if we're talking you want a 2020 camera, that award to me is only one camera that really got it right, in my opinion, and it's got to be the Panasonic S5. Bar none, Panasonic S5. It's got if not full frame, close to full frame, 4K 60 frames per second, no record limit, over 14 stops of dynamic range. It's a full frame sensor. You've got 10-bit recording. Granted, it's 420 10-bit in 60 frames per second. Dual native ISO for great low light performance, sensor stabilization, and a flip screen. Sure, the autofocus is still that depth by defocus from Panasonic, but for the most part, if you want an excellent camera that's going to really deliver with dynamic range, with video performance, I think under $2,000, it's hard to find something better than the Panasonic S5, which Panasonic, again, I have the GH5 and it's done well for me too, but you know, Panasonic really stepped it up with this S5 when it comes to both affordability and what you can do with it. So kudos to Panasonic. I got to give it to them on that. Now, the next category is a category that I just thought of really, it was something that came into play this year, because there were a lot of, I wouldn't have thought of this maybe any other year, but this year had a couple of surprises that I didn't expect. For example, I mentioned that before, this Sony ZV-1 I didn't see coming, where they would really emphasize on that vlogging perspective and really make it something. That camera, the ZV-1 for example, it's got a equivalent 24-70 lens in front of it, but it does really good like shallow depth of field for the size of the sensor that it has, and it looks pretty cool. Didn't expect that. Canon M50 Mark II. I mean, the M50 itself has a great reputation. Do I think they needed to release a Mark II with only marginal upgrades? That surprised me, but I guess not in a good way. It's almost like, yay, thanks. No need to upgrade the M50, but very much still surprising. However, the camera that really takes it for me when it comes to the surprise of the year has to be the Sony A7C. The Sony A7C, no idea why Sony thought of this, of releasing this type of camera. Granted, it's still got a pretty hefty price tag, but it's still a lot less than the A7 III, so it's like a dumbed down A7 III, but you've got the latest autofocus, which is incredible on Sony cameras. It's a full frame body, and it pretty much does everything that the A7 III does, but the viewfinder is like cut off the top, so it's got like a small little viewfinder, but you can still take amazing pictures with it. It's only got one card slot as well, but that dumbed down A7 III is still an excellent camera, and that's not a bad thing to have. A smaller, more portable A7 III. Who knew? Who expected it? To me, that was the most surprising, and I was just a bit confused, just like the M50 Mark II, but it really is a stellar camera in your hands if you choose to get that camera in 2020. So once again, Sony, kudos to you. You know, but let's move on to the next category. So nice job, Sony, as I like make these labels go away. So the final award is the best camera of 2020. Now for me, this best camera is a category that means a lot, at least when it comes to me, because it's got to mean that this camera was so good, so anticipated, so delivered on the specs, so delivered on the performance, that it just makes you want it. You cannot function without this camera, and makes even those that really shouldn't be buying a camera, they do buy this camera, I think. And it had to really deliver on a lot of performance that is possible, a lot of video features that are promised or are not anticipated are delivered, and excellent quality. It's got to just be the best all-arounder as much as possible. Granted, you have cameras such as the Sony, which is great, the Sony A7S III, which is great for video, Panasonic S5, great for video, S1H is great for video, but that was a previous year. Again, you've got, and I haven't included cinema cameras, but I will honorable mention to the Canon C70, honorable mention to Blackmagic's new Ursa Mini Pro with its 12K recording. I mean, those are incredible, but for hybrid cameras, to me, the best camera of the year that had a rough start, but definitely made it to a camera that was not only great, but it was worth owning. It's the R5. Canon R5. And R6 isn't even included with this. They had overheating issues, and right out the gate, and I have to mention this, overheating issues, but then right out the gate, Canon released a firmware that didn't completely remove the overheating issue, but there are a lot of YouTubers, and myself included, that when using this camera, the overheating has played little to no effect, which means 8K RAW, or 8K with a C-Log, 4K 120. You can get 4K 60 or 4K HQ, which is downsampled 8K, or 4K 60. If you crop it, it's downsampled 5K into 60 frames per second, which is amazing and awesome. Actually higher quality than the A7S III. And all of these features mixed in with the phenomenal photography camera. So you can take amazing pictures, switch over to video, do amazing video, flip screen, easy to work with menu. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's practically a perfect camera that kind of weighs a lot, but if it wasn't for the weight, it would be the perfect camera. And to be honest, the weight actually helps when it comes to keeping the shot steady. But there's nothing that this camera can't do that other cameras can't wish they can do. The low light performance I've tested as well against Sony A7S III, like 12,800 ISO. You put this next to the Sony, this doesn't do a bad job at all, even though it doesn't have dual gain ISO. And this is a camera that, when compared to a lot of the other cameras I've was excited about, I tested, and they did such a great job, I actually purchased it. And buying it, I have zero regrets. In fact, the only regret I have is that I can't do more with it because of our current situation that we're in right now. So that's it. That's my awards ceremony of 2020. So those are my choices. And again, they're just my choices. They may not be the same choices that everyone else has out there. But I think that it's my personal opinion of what cameras were the best in 2020. So I've got a question coming up. Do you think Panasonic is going to do another Micro Four Thirds camera? I was shocked at them putting out the what is that, GH1, and it got the Netflix nod. I honestly think that Micro Four Thirds doesn't have much of a future anymore. If they do pull out a next GH5 like a GH6, I do believe there will be a next GH6 or a next GH series for Micro Four Thirds, but I do not believe that there will be that lineup of sensor and cameras will continue. Maybe we can expect an announcement in early January or February for a GH6, for example, but I don't know if it'll happen anytime soon. But definitely thanks for the question. I'm not wearing my glasses, that's why it was hard to read. Anyway, I've got another live stream coming up on my Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/personalmagnus, where I'm going to actually play games in actually a few minutes, so I've got to do the setup there. But this stream was awesome. Thank you for joining on my Camera Awards 2020, and we'll see if this keeps going with a 2021 version, hoping for the best that we have a great year. But if nothing else and you like this video, let me know in the comments down below, or what are your top choices for each of my categories. Let me know, because it's just my opinion. Everyone has their own. But as always, you can make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm signing off this live stream. I'm out. See you guys later.